This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. TalkCatholic.com with Tim Kilcoyne, and indeed we are less than a month away from what could be the last free and fair election. Well, we might have already had it. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to look into things and find out who's running the place. And I just had a very lousy personal experience that might shed light on what is at stake in this upcoming election. As some of you know, I spend a good deal of time during the winter months especially, you know, those months when viruses are flying around, in the nursing home, assisted living, those type of places. Sometimes they're combined. And recently I was booked to play music in a very large nursing home. May there be no doubt, they all have money. And lots of it. Yours. And I don't really ask, but sometimes they pay me. Whatever. I do it as a ministry, whether they know it or not. In any event, I was getting ready to play music, so I thought. But there was one request that I had, because on the last two previous occasions in playing music at this particular nursing home, I got very sick. I got COVID on the first try, and then another wicked cold on the second. And this was back at Christmas time and Easter. Nevertheless, I'm not a glutton for punishment. I just don't believe in bowing to sickness and evil. And they do kind of go together sometimes. Sometimes. I didn't want to be afraid, so I went back, stayed with the game plan as I was booked several months in advance to play. In any event, as I got closer to the time, I had to put in a request because it was not coincidental that on both occasions of getting sick, I was very much in a non-ventilated kind of claustrophobic room. And it was the same room both times. Talk about lightning striking twice. And so on previous occasions, I had played in a big hall that was very nicely ventilated. And I was told by another worker at that home that most of the time that's where the musicians play. She couldn't understand why I was in that other room. So I simply put in a most kindly request in charity to the utmost, logic dictating the agenda, and prudence for that matter, that I really need to play in a different room. How dare I? And I know I have the whole world on my side, and all of a sudden the whole thing was canceled. And the woman, who had a very abrasive personality, to say the least, took it as an offense that I was telling her how to do her job and where to put the musicians. It could have been a bad day, you know, a bad hair day. I don't know. But the poor residents are the ones who lost out the most because they yearn for these special events, perhaps more than any other activity. And I have run into this attitude by the primary players in too many of these nursing homes. And it's despicable. These are the very people that carried out the pandemic policy of trapping the elderly in such places, as we now know for sure in retrospect. Well, anyway, one time I walked into a nursing home and I was given about 16 different orders at the front door as I was just trying to come in with my paraphernalia musically. And I just looked at her and I said, why do I believe that you enjoy every one of those orders? I got news for you. I'm here today to play music for you, not them. All right. My point is, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're not in the old days when you could trust everybody, especially the authorities. We're in uncharted waters in the last 3 years, if people haven't noticed. And the medical profession, and do see the new book called Follow the Science by Cheryl Atkinson, longtime journalist. to see all of the facts of the great cover-up of our lifetime precisely reflected at the nursing home. Because the medical profession is one of the vehicles of the New World Order, which Father Joe Esper will be addressing shortly in his book, Defiance: The Antichrist of History and Their Doomed War Against the Church. My major point here, as everything gets bigger, big corporations, big universities, big churches, we lose control. We lose control of the people that are there to serve. And they are no longer servants. They're dictators. And they have very little accountability because you're not quite sure who their boss is. And they're treating the poor people harshly. Can you imagine a time in life when you so want to be treated kindly than the elderly years? So I just want you to know that as we prepare to cast a vote, make sure you know exactly what you're voting for relative to those people that want to somehow turn America into this global village where you won't know who your boss is, but you'll feel it. Let there be no doubt. The angry social servant is out there in much bigger numbers than you think they are. And if you think that the answer to a better, kinder, gentler America has to do with having more nursing homes or more daycare centers, those are precisely the places where the state can take your life over and deplete you of every last penny that you earned, I might add, at least on the nursing home side. So beware, be educated, take your Catholic and or Christian and Jewish citizenship to cast that vote unbelievably seriously. And don't just think that, oh, the world just gone to hell in a handbasket and it doesn't matter anymore. It still matters. And those people who need us matter more. All right, let me continue on. We started briefly a chapter on the Antichrist in his book, Father Esper's book, Defiance. And today I'd like to spend a little more time exactly preparing you for what the next election really is going to have so much to do with. You're embracing or rejecting a new world order. And we'll get back to our book review, Answers, Not Promises, after our musical interlude. Father Esper says, the movement toward a new world order was an announced goal of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati Freemasons. And by the 1920s, we began to see planned economic, political, and military changes in our world designed to bring us to the place of world government. The science fiction writer H.G. Wells wrote a book titled The New World Order, and political leaders as diverse as Woodrow Wilson, Adolf Hitler, and Mikhail Gorbachev used the term. Gorbachev actually stated, tolerance is the alpha and omega of the New World Order. Sound familiar? Because the term began giving rise to fears and developing negative connotations, advocates generally no longer refer to a new world order in public. But the agenda of those advocating a global financial system, one world government, and even a one world religion remains unchanged. Indeed, the United Nations itself has been moving us toward a global currency, global tax, global stock exchange, global central bank, and world government for a long time. C.S. Lewis had once observed that the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. This is the purpose of their efforts to employ historical revisionism, attack the Judeo-Christian belief system, promote socialism, bring global taxation, the end of national sovereignty, a UN police force, and an international criminal court that would replace U.S. courts. These coordinated efforts are unfolding very gradually, for global governance will not march on Washington in the form of blue-helmeted troops. It is marching into our towns in the form of smart growth proposals, into our schools in the form of tolerance, and into our churches in the form of the environment. A major goal of the globalists is to lower the standard of living of middle-class citizens in the United States and other prosperous nations so as to reduce their economic independence and their ability to oppose the move to a one-world government. Moreover, the growing poverty of the working class tends to make people more dependent on government and less capable of resisting its encroachments on human rights and constitutional freedoms, a trend foreseen by the great Catholic apologist Hilaire Belloc in his 1912 book, the servile state. At the same time, public education is being turned into a tool of the globalists who realize that the only hope they could ever have to cause Americans to accept their radical socialist dictatorship would be to control the education and values of at least one generation of children, having eliminated the influence of parents and their traditional values. Not only are government public school students being indoctrinated with humanist and globalist values, parental control is consistently undermined, particularly when Christian parents try to raise their children according to their religious beliefs. Even more ominous, however, are reports of proposals to reduce the current world population to a more quote-unquote sustainable level. In his book, Hope of the Wicked, The Master Plan to Rule the World, Ted Flynn lists the following goals to be achieved as part of the implementation of the New World Order: the destruction of Western civilization, the dissolution of legal government, eradicating nationalism and every form of patriotism, reducing the economic freedom and status of American citizens by means of graduated income taxes, property taxes, inheritance taxes, and sales taxes, abolishing the right to private property, primarily by ever larger taxation, and destroying the family, primarily through divorce, abortion, and homosexuality. The movement toward a New World Order has serious consequences for Christians and the Church. The de-Christianization of society is especially evident in Western Europe, where the newly adopted Constitution of the European Union deliberately avoids any reference to the continent's Christian culture and traditions. The document also expressly forbids the implementation of certain laws essential from the perspective of Catholic morality, e.g., prohibiting abortion on demand and same-sex marriages. One of the greatest Catholics of the 20th century, St. Padre Pio, said, "Man is so full of pride that when he has everything he needs and good health, he believes himself a god and superior to God himself. But when something happens and he can do nothing, and others can't do anything about it either, only then will he remember that there is a supreme being." Until that day of crisis arrives, when the world comes crashing down and all human efforts are of no avail, human pride will interpret Christian humility and obedience as utter folly. The growing movement to create a one-world government and a new world religion represent an unprecedented rebellion against God and perhaps the gravest threat the Church has faced so far. Some elite members of this conspiracy even believe they are preparing for an imminent world leader and Messiah, the one identified by Scripture as the Antichrist. Even if this particular expectation is mistaken and the Antichrist's actual arrival is still many years off, the Church will be severely tested in the near future, but again, she will prevail. In the words of St. Peter Canisius, "Let the world indulge its madness, for it cannot endure and passes like a shadow. It is growing old, and I think is in its last decrepit stage. But we, buried deep in the wounds of Christ, why should we be dismayed?" During a time of great peril for Jerusalem, the Lord, speaking through the prophet Isaiah, addressed Israel's enemies. "Form a plan, and it shall be thwarted. Make a resolve, and it shall not be carried out. For with us is God." These scriptural promises still apply today, for God's word does not lose its force. No matter how cleverly conceived and carefully executed their plans, the architects of a new world order will be no more successful than the architects of the Tower of Babel. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want the perfect complement to everything Father Esper is telling us, it's a recent video on the internet by Grace Force, that being headed up by Doug Barry of EWTN fame, and Father Richard Heilman, and Father Chad Ripperger. They just did a particular segment on the 45 goals of communism. Are we facing this now? And those 45 goals of communism were actually read on the congressional floor in 1963 by W. Cleon Skousen in his book, The Naked Communist, which I hold in my hands. And it's just unbelievable the number of points that have already come to fruition and others, well, in process. Here's one. Develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. You can see the dismantling of the military, so much a part of the agenda. Permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation, and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. Do away with all loyalty oaths. There's an attack on integrity. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism
and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum.
Get control of teacher associations.
Put the party line in the textbooks. I'm telling you, gain control of all student newspapers. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy-making positions. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and pictures. This just goes on, and we're seeing it right before our very eyes. This is not an election about political parties. This is an election about whether you want to carry on freedom and sovereignty and the autonomy of the individual of the United States. And it is, again, very much up to our Catholic clergy to lead the way in helping us to stay free of the patriotic so-called Catholic Church of China. Just more dictatorship of the state ruling the church. We will be in the catacombs, ladies and gentlemen, if everybody doesn't figure out which party represents this vision all the more. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. On the other side, Mother Mary Angelica's book, Answers, Not Promises. Well, I dedicate this to those residents that I should have and could have played for. You will be honored here. Connie Evingston, So Nice.
Someone to hold me tight, that would be very nice. Someone to love me right, that would be very nice. Someone to understand each little dream in me. Someone to take my hand, to be a team with me. So nice. Life would be so nice if one day I'd find someone who could take my hand and samba through life with me. Someone to cling to me, stay with me right or wrong. Someone to sing to me some little samba song. Someone to take my heart, then give his heart to me. Someone who's ready to give love a start with me. Oh yes, that would be so nice. Oh, should it be you and me, I could see it would be nice.
Okay, well, in the last session, we're hearing Mother Angelica tell us how to overcome lust. We include that question in the presidential debates. Wouldn't that get right to the heart of character? In any event, she was talking about a guy that was hooked on pornography, thumbing through the channels, and little did he know what he was going to find. Mother Mary Angelica. She says, the reason I do not take the subject of lust lightly is because I do not take the sexual union of two human beings lightly. I believe that sexual union in the sacrament of marriage is one of the most eloquent and sacred expressions of Christian love. When you are caught up in the throes of lust, you don't see sexual union as a gift from God. You don't find it beautiful or sacramental. It is, for you, simply a base emotion or a physical sensation, a sign of conquest or a band-aid for loneliness, and it is no more meaningful than any other animal hunger. But Mother, I'm just human, you say. I have desires and sexual appetites. Am I supposed to pretend they're not there? No, that is not my point. My point is that you are not just human. When you say just human, you really mean just an animal. It is so popular these days to write off all of our weaknesses and infidelities to the fact that we are only human. It's a convenient way to disavow our responsibility to ourselves and our neighbor, our world, and our God. I watched an X-rated movie while my wife was out of town, but what do you want? I'm just human. I went home with that beautiful blonde last night, but what could I do? Everybody does it. Things are different today. I picked up a skin magazine and looked at some photos. Hey, I'm human. What do you want? Well, if you are a Christian, what you want is better. And God demands better. God demands better because you are better. You are made in His image. You bear His spirit in your soul. You are not an animal. You have an intellect. You have free will. And when it comes to your body, you have an extraordinary, wonderful gift of sexuality that God has given you, not to faint and abuse and degrade, but to celebrate and glorify and cherish. And one of the ways you do this is by joining your spouse in the sacramental act of sexual union. As human beings, we are wonderfully made, as David said in the Psalms, "It was you who created my inmost self. and put me together in my mother's womb. For all these mysteries I thank you, for the wonder of myself, for the wonder of your works. Our bodies are miracles in and of themselves, and they house the great gift of our hearts and minds. But that's not all, for St. Paul tells us that we are temples of the Holy Spirit, and this is precisely why we are not animals. Those who enter the sacrament of marriage must vow to take the dignity of human sexuality very seriously. They must believe that when two people marry, it is more than the establishment of joint checking accounts or the creation of a household or the culmination of romantic love. When the love of two people is mutually pledged in marriage, it is the expression of the Trinity, with the Father loving the Son and the Son loving the Father, and the Spirit is the love between them. What has all this to do with lust? Well, when two people are united in their love and when they express that love in sexual union, it is, in every way, the perfect creative act. There is no gesture in the human domain that even comes close to an act of such perfection and beauty. The fruit of that gesture is both enhanced love and the bearing of children, and thus what always remains is something deeper and more beautiful than existed before. For Christians, this beauty is sacred, and that's why the problem with uncontrolled lust is not just an ethical difficulty or a mere matter of breaking some rules. It's a sacrilege. Am I saying that sexual desire per se is a sacrilege? Not at all. Sexual desire for your spouse is part of an exalted creative act, but to indulge your sexual desire outside of the context of marriage is a sacrilege. It is a sin, and that's where lust can present some real spiritual problems.
Well, I'm going to share you a story, and you may or may not believe it, but indeed it happened just last night as I'm recording this show. I had been doing some yard work, and I had some music playing. And apparently somebody was listening to this music.
Beautiful romantic music. Outdoors.
And then I went out and cleaned my car in the front of my house. And after I was all finished, I came into the house. It's getting dark. It wasn't totally dark. It's around 7 p.m., but very much getting there. And all of a sudden I see a young woman,
A most attractive woman at that.
on my back porch.
At my back door.
And so I opened the door, and she's almost ready to walk right in. And she's telling me about how she heard this beautiful music playing.
Started going into a little dance. I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen.
She's wondering where it came from. This is a very attractive woman I'm talking about here. And she's all by herself, and doesn't she happen to have a drink in her hand? Indeed, she was definitely under the influence.
And not of the Holy Spirit.
And I tried to exercise Mother Angelica like a self-discipline in the proper way, no doubt, to point her in a different direction, like away from here, off my property. But she wasn't mean or anything.
Quite the contrary. She was looking for quite a social night.
But it was just unbelievable. I was thinking, could this be the devil? The devil can take forms, And given the nature of my work, don't you think it's not possible to bring me down? All right. It was truly. I told it to another friend of mine who didn't quite have the same kind of sexual mores that I do, and of course he thought I was kind of out of my mind.
He asked me, "Do you need someone to cut the grass?"
Well, I quickly corrected him as to what a Catholic morality entails. The exercise of virtue, the exercise of self-discipline.
In the moment, because you've been strengthened by habitual grace through the sacraments.
And most of all, the desire to want best, what's best for the other person. And that person, this woman, was no doubt acting on those more base desires in doing what she was doing.
But boy, providentially, didn't she get the wrong guy or the right guy?
And but of course, what made it most unique is to have this kind of experience in your 60s. Needless to say, it's a regular experience when you're 17. And I used to teach those 17-year-olds in a couple of different prep schools, a Catholic morality class. And I would bring out Mary Beth Bonacci's most classic analogy
from what could be called the Bible of love, sex, and dating. Real Love is the title of her book.
It's like two pieces of paper coming together with super glue on them, all right? The sexual act bonds you.
Your souls, not just your bodies.
Brings you together, and if you break up, well, pieces of you kind of stick, like your heart And this is why it's so devastating when people get all caught up in the lustful, carnal desires of a lifestyle and start treating sexuality in a most trivial, recreational sort of way. They have no idea at the time that they're hurting a person's soul terribly. I remember a guy from the West Coast, he was Joe Studley, taught English in our prep school and probably everything that I wasn't teaching. And he was introducing me to his first conquest. And the poor woman, we were at a little dance club or something, and she had such a sad look on her face. She clearly didn't care to be a trophy for this guy. Brutal, absolutely brutal. That poor girl is probably scarred for life. The two pieces of paper, when you go to tear them apart, they don't tear clean. Keep your purity, especially all you young people, but this applies to all people at all ages. Don't you think you get a different playbook? Not here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We'll see you next week. Purity still rules. God bless.
Experience the incredible story of a woman who Time magazine named the most influential Catholic woman in the United States. Rita Rizzo, the future Mother Angelica, grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Canton, Ohio during the Great Depression. Rita's father abandoned the family before she was 5 years old. Her early years of trial were compounded by a debilitating illness until she was healed by Jesus through a woman named Rhoda Wise. That healing set her life on a course that would ultimately change the world. Learn the amazing story of Rita Rizzo at the Mother Angelica Museum in her hometown of Canton, Ohio. Go to www.motherangelicamuseum.com. Be inspired. Plan your visit now at motherangelicamuseum.com.
Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.